have been discussing about the paper Introduction to Philosophy, which is introduced for the first semester students under the UGCF NEP syllabus of University of Delhi for the Department of Philosophy. We continue discussing on this paper today, and today our discussion would be of Unit 4, which is by and large the social and political philosophy and philosophy of science. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, this Unit 4 is designed to cover two major branches of philosophy, social and political. This area of social and political philosophy explores fundamental questions about the state, government, justice, liberty, rights, law, and the enforcement of a legal code by authority. It delves into how society should be organized and what makes a government legitimate or just. Meanwhile, philosophy of science is the field that investigates the foundations, methods, and implications of science. It examines what constitutes scientific knowledge, how scientific theories are developed and tested, and the nature of scientific explanation. Let's start with the basic. When we talk about social and political philosophy, the first theme that should come to everyone's mind is a concept called the social contract. The core idea about the social contract is a foundational concept in political philosophy that proposes an implicit agreement amongst individuals constituting an organized society or between the individuals and their ruler. It suggests that individuals voluntarily surrender some of their rights and freedoms to a government or collective authority in exchange for protection, order, and other benefits of living in a structured society. Some of the key thinkers associated with the theory or the concept of social contract is Thomas Hobbes. Now, Thomas Hobbes argued that in a state of nature, which is life without government, human life would be, in his words, within quotes, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. People enter a social contract to escape the chaos, giving absolute power to a sovereign for security. His view emphasizes order over individual liberty. The other philosopher who is associated with the theory of social contract is John Locke. John Locke had proposed a more optimistic view of the state of nature, where individuals possess natural rights, which is life, liberty, and property. The social contract for Locke is formed to protect these natural rights. If the government fails to do so, citizens have a right to resist or overthrow it, emphasizing limited government and consent of the governed. Also, there is the mention of J.J. Rousseau, who is believed or who largely believed that society corrupts individuals and that the social contract should aim to create a community where people are free by obeying a general will, the collective good of the community. This concept is nuanced and has been interpreted in various ways, from participatory democracy to justification for totalitarian policies. Now, if we check the contemporary relevance, we see that the idea of a social contract continues to be debated in discussions about state legitimacy, individual rights versus collective good, and the ethics of political obligation. Now, about justice, we understand that it is a broad and multifaceted concept, typically that refers to fairness and rights. It concerns the proper ordering of things and persons within society, particularly regarding the allocation of resources, opportunities, and punishments. Then comes the concept of distributive justice. This justice focuses on the fair allocation of resources and wealth among members of a society. What constitutes a fair distribution? Example, equality, equity, need, merit. Procedural justice. This concerns the fairness of the processes and methods used to make decisions, resolve disputes, and allocate resources. It is about how decisions are made, not just the outcome. Retributive justice. It deals with the appropriate response to wrongdoing. What is a just punishment for a crime? An eye for an eye versus rehabilitation. Restorative justice. It aims to repair the harm caused by the crime by involving victims, offenders, and community members in a process of dialogue and negotiation, focusing on healing and reconciliation. Key thinkers again further could be Plato, where in the Republic Plato conceptualized justice as a harmony within the individual soul and within the state, where each part performs its proper function. Aristotle, who distinguished between distributive justice, fair share of goods, and corrective justice, rectifying wrongs, emphasizing proportionality and equality. Now, John Rawls, in his A Theory of Justice, proposed a thought experiment involving an original position within quotes, behind the veil of ignorance within quotes, to determine principles of justice that rational individuals would choose. His two main principles are equal basic liberties for all and arrangements of social and economic inequalities that are both to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged and attached to offices open to all under fair equality of opportunity, often called justice as fairness. There is also Robert Nozick, who is a libertarian philosopher who argued for an entitlement theory of justice, focusing on just acquisition and transfer of holdings rather than patterns of distribution. He emphasized minimal state intervention. Now, we must understand that this unit also has some primary readings and secondary readings. Some of the nuances of the readings, like that of Tom Brooks, What is Justice? This specific reading provides a contemporary overview of these various theories and debates, exploring the complexities and challenges in defining and achieving justice in modern societies. It might be needed to delve into practical applications or criticisms of foundational theories. Now, let's talk about the scientific temper. The core idea of scientific temper, which is the third part of Unit 4 with social and political philosophy, justice and scientific temper, we see that it is a concept prominently associated with India and particularly with Nehru that refers to an attitude of rational and logical thinking, critical inquiry and the rejection of dogma, superstition and blind faith. It encourages evidence-based reasoning and a questioning spirit. Now, to check some of the characteristics of these temper, we see that scientific temper is marked by, number one, rationality and reason. It emphasizes on using logic and reason to understand the world rather than emotion or prejudice. Empirical evidence, valuing observation, experimentation, and verifiable data as the basis for knowledge. Questioning and skepticism is yet the other feature of scientific temper, which is encouraging doubt and critical examination of claims, no matter their source, rather than accepting them uncritically. Open-mindedness, which is willingness to change one's views in light of new evidence. Rejection of superstition is perhaps one of the hallmarks of a scientific temperament. This is actively combating beliefs and practices based on irrational fears or unverified traditions. Humanism, which is often associated with a humanistic outlook, promoting welfare and progress based on scientific understanding rather than fatalism or divine intervention. Now, further, if we read some of the primary readings or the recommended readings, specifically D.P. Chattopadhyay's work of 1990s entitled as Defending the Scientific Temper, we see that this particular reading delves into the importance of cultivating scientific temper, particularly in a social context prone to superstitions or uncritical acceptance of tradition. It would probably argue for the necessity of these mindset for societal progress, critical decision making, and navigating complex challenges. It might also address criticisms or challenges to promoting scientific temper. The fact that it is from the Indian International Center Quarterly reinforces its context within Indian thought and public discourse. Similarly, with Duncan Pritchard's work, What is This Thing Called Philosophy, which is the prescribed text published in 2015, we see that here in this text it serves as a general introduction to philosophy, and for this particular unit, which is Unit 4, it provides foundational explanations of core philosophical concepts related to social and political philosophy and philosophy of science. Further, it introduces the major theories of justice like utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, or contract theories in a more general philosophical context before the specific justice themed reading by Tom Brooks takes over. It is also significant to note at this point that for the philosophy of science aspect, it might and can entail certain topics like the demarcation problem, that is what distinguishes science or what demarcates science from non-science, induction and deduction, scientific realism versus anti-realism, falsification of Karl Popper, and paradigm shifts of Kuhn. These broad discussions lay the groundwork for understanding the scientific temper as a practical application of a philosophical approach to science. Now, if we look at the PPT that is being displayed here, we see that under the core aim of the text, what is this thing called philosophy? It introduces philosophy as a method of inquiry about justice, why it introduces why is scientific temperament necessary, and about defending the scientific temper. It defends rational scientific thinking in society. The question, the central question about the first part is, what is philosophy and how does it work? About justice, again, it talks about what is justice, and the second part, followed by the third, where we are talking about defending the scientific temper, it is as to why is scientific temperament necessary. The nature of inquiry, why is this thing called philosophy? We see that it is critical, analytical, conceptual. What is justice? We see that it is normative and evaluative. Defending the scientific temper, we see that it is rational and empirical. The methodology for the first is again to do with thought experiments, argument analysis. For the second part, it is comparative theory, like for Rawls, Nozick and others. And for the third, it is evidence-based reasoning and critique. Further, for the aspect of the view of knowledge, for the first part, it deals with how knowledge requires justification and clarity. For the second part, knowledge of justice is plural and debated. And for the third part, the defending the scientific temper, knowledge must be evidence-based. Role of reason, for the first part, it is central to philosophical thinking. For the second part, it is what is justice, used to evaluate fairness. And for defending the scientific temper, it is essential for rejecting superstition. Further, on the view on society, what is this thing called philosophy? Here, philosophy helps understand social issues. What is justice? The view on society. Here, society must be organized justly. Defending the scientific temper, society must cultivate scientific mindset. And the concept of truth, what is this thing called philosophy? We see that it is open to questioning and debate. What is justice? It is contextual and contested. And defending the scientific temper, it is grounded in evidence and verification. Further, about the critiques offered, what is this thing called philosophy? We see that it challenges everyday assumptions. What is justice? It critiques single theory justice. And defending the scientific temper, it critiques blind belief and dogma. The philosophical scope, for the first, it is definitely broad with epistemology, ethics and logic. For the second, it is largely under the theme of political philosophy. And for the third, it is philosophy of science and society. If we are to check the relevance today, for the first, we see that it builds critical thinking skills. For the second, it guides policy and justice systems. And for the third, it promotes rational democracy. Further, the limitations. For the first, it can be abstract and sometimes detached. For the second, no single clear definition. And for the third, it may undervalue cultural traditions. Now, if we further see the focus area of the recommended readings for this unit, Pritchard, Brooks and Chattopadhyay, we see the focus area for Pritchard has been on the nature of philosophy. For Brooks, it has been on nature of justice, and Chattopadhyay has been on nature of rational thinking. The type of philosophy for the first is meta-philosophy, for Brooks, political philosophy, and for the last, it is philosophy of science. The human concern for Pritchard is understanding knowledge, for Brooks it is achieving fairness, and for Chattopadhyay it is thinking correctly. The approach to problems for Pritchard it is questioning assumptions, for Brooks it is comparing theories, for Chattopadhyay it is rejecting irrationality. Now, for the theme on certainty versus doubt, Pritchard encourages doubt, Brooks accepts disagreement, Chattopadhyay seeks reliable certainty through science. For the diversity of views, for Pritchard it is multiple philosophical methods, for Brooks it is multiple justice theories, and for Chattopadhyay it has been the science that evolves but remains rational. For the dimension of what it teaches, Pritchard focuses on how to think for philosophy, Brooks has largely been for justice, how to be fair, and for Chattopadhyay, the scientific temper, how to think scientifically. The nature for Pritchard is analytical, for Brooks it is normative, for Chattopadhyay it has been empirical. The goal for Pritchard is clarity, Brooks fairness, Chattopadhyay truth. Risk over abstraction for Pritchard, for Brooks it is disagreement, and for Chattopadhyay over rationalization. For strength it is critical thinking, for Brooks on justice it is ethical guidance, and for Chattopadhyay it is practical progress. Further, we see that when we talk about the introduction to nature and methods of philosophy, the core aim, and then when we talk about thinking it through, it engages with contemporary philosophical problems, and to think is to make philosophy accessible and engaging, and further critical thinking is basically teaching logical reasoning and argument analysis. Similarly, in what is this thing called philosophy, we see that the focus has been on what philosophy is and how it works. Thinking it through is basically how philosophy applies to real life issues. To think is to bring up big philosophical questions in simple terms, and critical thinking is to come up with how to think clearly and critically. Now, the approach, as we can see in what is this thing called philosophy, is analytical and structured. Thinking it through is dialogical and issue based. To think is narrative and explanatory, and critical thinking is logical and skills based. Similarly, the style, we see what is this thing called philosophy. It is academic but accessible. Thinking it through, it is conversational and reflective. To think is reader friendly, illustrative. Critical thinking is instructional and systematic. Now, it is important, for all these are major nuances which have their own differences. What is this thing called philosophy is distinct from thinking it through, which again can be distinct from standalone think, and further to something what we call as critical thinking. Now, the main themes of the first is knowledge, skepticism, reasoning. For the second, it is mind, ethics, identity, society. For the third, it is truth, knowledge, self, morality. And for the fourth, it is arguments, fallacies, reasoning. Similarly, the type of philosophy for the first is meta-philosophy and epistemology. For the second, it is contemporary analytic philosophy. The third, it is general introduction to philosophy. And for the last, it is logic and critical thinking. So, we stop our discussion here for today. We continue further in our next discussion on this very theme. Thank you for being guided. Thank you.